global perspective of Galwaan. What has happened after 1 year? So it will be the global perspective, and we need to understand how globally China is getting affected. And this will have the session moderator would be with the Professor Amitabh Mattu, who is the Professor of International Relations at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Mattu is well known and does not need any introduction. The way he knew, he is well versed with the Chinese diaspora and the subject matter. So I'll hand over the chair to Professor Mattu.
Thank you very much, Major Bansal, for your kind words. And to Aditya and Team GCTC for organizing this absolutely first-rate seminar. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers, but I shall make some initial housekeeping remarks so that we stick to our time, which is that everyone will get no more than 7 minutes to speak, 5 minutes ideally, 7 minutes the outer limit. And I'll mute you if you don't stop. After you've all spoken, we'll have question and answers, which ideally everyone who has a question should put it in the chat box, and I'll read out the question or invite the person to read out after the speakers have spoken. And then we'll give the speakers another 2 to 3 minutes to respond to the questions being asked, after which I'll make some couple of minutes of concluding comments. We have to end this session by 9:15 p.m. at the very latest. Now I have a list of speakers from Aditya with lists, and I want you all, anyone who's not there, for Aditya to tell me if they're not there. Cleo Pascal, Major General Abdul Rashid, Major General Binoj Basniak, Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, Professor Alka Acharya, Professor Christian Conert, Professor Madhavdas Nalapat, Kaswar Klasra, and Brigadier Vinod Datta. If everyone is there, then I can begin.
All are there, sir.
All are there. And unless someone has the problem with the sequence which I just listed out, then I'll invite people in exactly that sequential order. Now, it's been 1 year, as you must have heard, for the last 2 hours, since the supreme sacrifice that Colonel Santosh Babu and 19 other soldiers, including of the 16th Bihar, rendered for the country in the heights of Galwaan. Since then, the world has changed. World has changed mostly for the worse. And that is the reason why we are holding this seminar, is to see that whether the world is looking as dismal as it is looking from New Delhi to various parts of the world, in various parts of the world. From New Delhi's perspective, there were 4 or 5 major changes, which were perhaps the peg was 15th of June, but it had started much earlier. One, that a general belief that Chinese hegemony in Asia would be benign was completely undermined by the incidents in Galwaan. That the Chinese were not only not willing to accept the rules of the game in terms of the way in which Asia was being managed, all great powers try and change the rules, but they were willing to use force to be a revisionist power. How does one counter Chinese strategic power and revisionist thinking? And the belief that the Chinese will not be deterred from existing norms of the international system. India has opted for closer relationship with the United States. It has entered into an understanding with the Quad countries, but the biggest challenge from China is not maritime, it's continental. Which means that other than drones and technology, there's very little that other countries, especially the Quad countries, can do to help us guard our frontiers, land borders with China, even though we might contain their influence within the Indo-Pacific region. The second is the economic challenge. There was a belief that given what's happened in Galwaan, and given what's happened because of the pandemic, and that's something that I'll come to, that there would be a decoupling of the economic relationship. Sadly, tragically, unfortunately, this was much easier said than done. India, of course, made the loudest noise, and we made some symbolic gestures of preventing imports from China, and banning some of their some of their applications, internet applications. But other than that, there is no evidence to suggest that that decoupling has occurred. The third challenge was in terms of multilateralism posed by the pandemic and the manner in which China would be held accountable for at least not acting with the alacrity to prevent the pandemic from moving across its borders, even though now there is significant evidence to suggest that it might have been a laboratory manufactured virus in the first place. Even there, whether it's the WHO or other multilateral organizations, there is very little evidence that China is about to be called to task for its behavior. So strategically, we are still not sure how we respond to the Chinese challenge. Economically, we still seem to have a relationship of deep interdependence at the very least. Multilaterally, we do not seem to have brought China to the book. And then the last thing which Major Bansal pointed out was Chinese propaganda, whether it's the aggressiveness on Global Times or the manner in which the Chinese official spokesperson blocks you on Twitter. Fortunately, I have not been blocked on Twitter by her. But also the manner in which China is using the social media much more effectively, even though the Confucius centers might be closing down, even though the other country that I have the closest relationship with, Australia, has reacted very strongly to Chinese intrusion in the domestic politics, including bribing their MPs like Sam Dastyari and so on. Even then, the Chinese influence through the diaspora, and I'm not an expert, Major Bansal, on the Chinese diaspora. I hope I never put in a position of speaking for the Chinese diaspora. But I understand that China uses the diaspora as an instrument of its soft power, often. Having said all this, what I've listed for you is that while the world has changed, we do not seem to have any easy answers to where we are going. As someone who believes that we should get perspectives from women, I'll ask Cleo Pascal to begin the session. In a field where there is too many men and too few women, Cleo Pascal, welcome, and let's hear you speak.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the honor to be able to speak on this particular day where we're remembering what happened a year ago. I'm currently in Washington at a conference with American military personnel, which is why I'm in a hallway in a hotel with very terrible acoustics and horrible visuals. But when I explained to them what this event was, they asked me to convey on behalf of the American military people who I've been working with here their condolences and respect for the loss of the men in Galwaan, and to let you know that militaries around the world saw what happened on that terrible night, and they saw what the PLA is, and they saw what the Indian military is, and there is no question who is on the side of right. And the loss of those men and the way that they died galvanized people around the world, especially those in the armed forces, to truly understand what we're facing as a global community. And you know, those Colonel Babu and his men were the most visible people that were murdered by the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA over the past year. But what's also become clear as we start to connect the dots of how China operates is there have been multiple attempts to destabilize and kill off India by China, by Beijing, because of what India is, because it is fundamentally an existential threat to China, because it is a successful, hopeful, pluralistic democracy of 1 billion people that offers a different pathway forward. So, you know, if you're leading the Chinese Communist Party and you say you need to be authoritarian and you need to have this sort of economy to have legitimacy, you can point to India and say, no, actually, there's a whole different model. And so what we've seen over the last year are repeated attacks on India. We saw the attack on the iPhone parts manufacturing plant in Bengaluru, which was an attempt to try to convince the world that you shouldn't be redirecting supply chains to India. You saw the attack on the Mumbai electrical grid. You saw the attack by the Maoists. Another 20 good men died at the hands of the Maoists. And this incredibly peculiar second wave. So the attacks on India, which Colonel Babu and his men suffered the most visible frontal assault a year ago, have not stopped. And it's what it's made us do is look at this way that China attacks, which is extremely comprehensive and falls in line with their doctrine of comprehensive national power, which is they want to knock out any competition and be the most powerful country in the world. And that means unrestricted warfare. They will do whatever it takes. And geographically, one of the most important areas in order to be in a position of comprehensive national power is the Himalayas. The idea of the palm and the 5 fingers goes back to Mao. So whether they're doing it by pushing men off cliffs or political influence in Nepal, the goal is the same. The goal has been consistent and it will not stop. The other thing we learned over the last year, though, is that if you're dealing with this kind of comprehensive national power push where they will use unrestricted warfare in every single sector, what you need to do is defend yourself in a very comprehensive way. And India has led the way in showing how creative strategists can identify entry points and block them off. And one of the first things that India did after the men were murdered was block the Chinese apps. And that was a stroke of genius. You know, it deprived Chinese AI developers who are weaponizing their systems of massive amounts of metadata. It deprived the Chinese intelligence services of intel. It deprived them of the ability to force narrative out through apps like TikTok. And it knocked $6 billion off the valuation of the parent company of just one of those apps alone. That was an example of how India's been on the front line of these attacks, but it's also been on the front line of shaping the sort of defense that we need as a global community to protect ourselves from these sorts of multifaceted attacks. Another sector that India has been leading the way with is around the media and around the use of language for pushing back on some of these Chinese political warfare narratives. As we know, Indian scientists and Indian newspapers have been some of the best at understanding what happened with COVID. I mean, the Indian scientists knew this very early on. It was the Western media that shut down that debate, but Indian media has since then picked up the slack and been some of the best coverage about China now is definitely coming out of India. We had Jita Basu, the Sunday Guardian, does excellent work. NewsX does excellent work. And it's going around the world. It's being appreciated. And part of that is a reappropriation of language. So you're starting to hear the use of Indo-Tibet border, for example, or the ASEAN Sea. And that is the kind of essential elements of political warfare that India is innovating for dealing with China. And I would argue that, you know, we need more of that. We've used the word decouple multiple times over the past hour. That implies that the economic relationship is that of a couple, two equals who benefit to the same degree from this economic engagement. But it's not a couple relationship with China economically. It's a parasitic relationship. China comes in and sucks out intellectual capital and raw materials and brings it back to China as much as they can, and tries to create a situation where they are controlling the host through these economic levers. So the more we use these accurate words to describe what's going on, the better it is, the easier it is to fight back. And that, again, is something that India has innovated in. And winning on the political warfare battlefield is the first step for ensuring that the kinetic warfare is less likely. And as India has innovated over the past year, I think sort of one I know that they just unveiled a statue to Colonel Babu, but in the context of working with India's neighbors, but also teaching the rest of the world how to fight this fight, you know, if India set up a Colonel Babu Center for Political Warfare Studies that would help train people, the rest of us, to do what India has been doing so effectively over the past year, would be extremely helpful. And this goes to this other issue of, you know, working with allies. Again, the past year has been extraordinary for the way that's developed around things like the Quad. But there's still a lot that needs to be done. There's still such an active fight against India in terms of India as an effective partner and leader globally on these issues. That I was in the Bahamas about 2 months ago, and they got their first shipment of vaccines, and it was free vaccines from India. It was the first time they'd got any vaccines delivered into the country. And there had been no briefing from the Indian side about why India was engaging in this vaccine diplomacy. So it was very easy for Chinese elements to say, oh, they're giving you these vaccines because they're bad and they're not, you know, they're not effective and that sort of thing. So as India kind of gets to grips with helping us understand what China is domestically, regionally, the Indian story, if it's told more globally, that India is not the West, it's not China, it's a different way forward and a different way of doing foreign policy, that the rest of the world actually is craving. Countries in the Pacific that I work with a lot are craving more engagement with India. You'll find allies that are just waiting to find you. And this all started, this understanding of how important India is, how much China is trying to undermine it, and how India can effectively fight back, started a year ago when those men were killed in action on the border. And so the world owes them a huge debt of gratitude. And I can tell you that their sacrifice and their valor and their honor is acknowledged.
Thank you very much, Cleo Pascal, for those very important words of global solidarity that you bring from your own and the perspective of the other countries that you're engaged with. I do think that one of the recommendations of this conference should be that we should have, as Cleo Pascal said, a memorial and a think tank dedicated to the memory of the brave Colonel Santosh Babu, Mahavir Chakra. I think that's a very critical and important recommendation that should go to the highest political leadership in the country. The second speaker is Major General Abdul Rashid. General Saab. You're muted, General Saab.
Yes, thank you very much to the GTC for inviting me. and I'm glad to see so many distinguished speakers speaking, mostly from the Indian points of view. I'm not in the Indian, so I'm in the Indian neighborhood. So we may have some views which may not be consistent with all what you have spoken about the China. Chinese, what I mean to say, that your all views were centered around to preserve Indian interest, and I have not heard any language how to preserve the whole regional interest. So I am more concerned from the Indian neighborhood that India should start thinking about the regional neighborhood interest and concern and share it together so that we can have a better bondage. So Bangladesh and India is a very good friend, historical friend. And our liberation, the Indian soldier also laid down their lives for the cause of our freedom. So we respect them, and we also pay our humble tribute to those soldiers and officers who have laid down their life, made the supreme sacrifice for protecting the Indian integrity. Now, question is that China with the Indian in Galwaan Valley. Now, is there China's aggression? Was it legal or illegal? So that was, we consider it is not a legal military action. Illegally, they wanted to take the Indian territory. So we must protest that. And it is not for only India. Anywhere in the world, Bangladesh foreign policy is somewhat related to the friendship to all and malice to none. And so far, I heard that Bangladesh is maintaining a very balance between Indian relation and Chinese relation. And now decoupling. And the Bangladesh is suddenly decouple China. China has threatened Bangladesh that Bangladesh will enter into Quad, and then the relation will be affected. Bangladesh responded very strongly. A sovereign nation has a right to make sovereign decision whether the Bangladesh will join Quad or not. Of course, the name Quad, I have an what is called objection to that, because you said Quad means it's a 4 countries. So now you are asking the others to join in the Quad. So that its name itself, caption itself, is not conducive to the
Janusab, you
others.
join and we'll make it a polygon.
I said that they are asking for the joining. So it is only 4 countries. Now you say I'm a 5th country or 6th country, 7th country. I don't know. So that is not a very good naming by say Quad, and they say okay others to join. So that's good. We see that China at this moment, his behavior and the state characters is not first democratic. A authoritative regime, they actually wanted to bully world. So that is where our question stands. Why bullying? You see, Bangladesh has received a number of bullies. Now to make the group, or we would like to fight together so that everybody obeys the international law and norms. So protect the law. Somebody said about the climate condition and the water of the Tibet's, which China wants to control. Now, Bangladesh has also water issue. Now, I see that water issue has never been talked out very openly or very explicitly. Now, that is a question. Now, the relations, once that develops, the Indian neighborhoods, I see Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and everything, they have a tendency to make a China corridor. So that, how we are going to stop it? So in that case, India cannot stand alone. So they have to keep their neighborhood together by addressing the concerns and the interest, maintaining the interest of their neighborhood as well. So I see that policy must be conducive to the friends. I said that Bangladesh people are so respectful to the Indian soldiers who laid down their lives for the cause of Bangladesh freedom. Still they remember. So that relation is historical and connected with the blood. So automatically must maintain and make a policy so that the concern of Bangladesh must be addressed mutually with India as well. So if the Bangladesh, when is in trouble or facing some crisis, in that case, they would like to see India constantly beside them. Now, inconsistency of relation sometimes affects or makes the foreign policy makers to switch to somewhere else. So that is a tendency that Indian policy must focus on that, so that these countries, for example, even the COVID, you see now everybody is now accusing China for the COVID. Now we are happy that India responded to Bangladesh with the first time the AstraZeneca vaccine, and with which Bangladesh started their vaccination. We are grateful to that. But there is inconsistency. Now, at the moment, what I see, that Indian failure of supplying the vaccines to the Bangladesh, now Bangladesh has turned towards United States, they turn towards China, Russia. So automatically there is a break in the relation which was developed with the soft diplomacy with the vaccine. So there must be a continuity of the policy as well as consistency of the policy. And they should be addressing the all neighbors, Indian neighborhoods, neighbors' concern and the interest. So I'm sure the economically China is powerful, no doubt it. He is using his economic power, his military power, his psychological power, and I know that how much they are exerting on Bangladesh at this moment, because Bangladesh's strategic locations is coming up, its economic power and the other things has made them quite strategically important. So automatically, we have to make, after post-COVID, we see a new polarization. And if you see that new polarization, the traditional bondage that has been broken. So during the building up of the new polarization, we must keep that in focus to curb Chinese dominance in the Indian Ocean or the Bay of Bengal areas. We must work together, and we must be very concerned to see the nation's concern as well as their interest. And if that is conducive to the neighbors, I am sure all we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Saab, for those wise words from Bangladesh. And now, and you pointed out how, while your perspective might differ, but I find there's a great convergence of your views with India. And while as a sovereign country, I think it's important for you to develop your own perspective from your own national interest. Where there's a convergence, there's obviously a possibility of coordination and cooperation. And if it's only a question of a name, I'm sure the chord can be changed into a pentagon or a quintet, or there's nothing. All these are socially constructed typologies, so I don't think there's anything fixed in stone. I'll now invite a perspective from Kathmandu, from Nepal. Major General Binoj Basniat. General Saab, are you there? Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Professor.
you.
Thank you, Professor. I bring greetings from Nepal. So thank you, Global Counterterrorism Council, for inviting me as a speaker in the webinar, Decoding 1 Year of Galwaan Face-Off, a Global Perspective. It is indeed very pleasing to be with all the distinguished speakers in this session 2. Before I begin, in the outset, let me place my tribute to the soldiers who shed their bloods for the country, and at the same time thank India and the Indian people on helping Nepal with the pandemic, with the vaccines. Now we need to work together to set a route so that we can counter the pandemic together. So now when we discuss about the Galwaan incident, we preempt that India and China, with their cooperations and competitions, has entered the third sea confrontation, which unquestionably positions militarization as a response and as an initiative. So the arc of the Himalayas has been significantly important for both India and China. Power rivalry between China and the United States will bring about backing to friends and allies, particularly India in South Asia. The military happening will lead to political insecurity, political economy, political social dynamics, and has regional and global implications. This is one component of the great game. So I will spend the next 7 minutes on South Asian perspective on 3 broad headings, hoping it will further assist in understanding the complementations. And I would like to express and communicate to the listeners in the wider audience. One is the geostrategic environment of the IPR, the Indo-Pacific region. Second is the strategic descriptions of the Himalayan region. And third, the doctrinal imperatives. So let me put forward the geostrategic environment of IPR. The governments, big or small, powerful or weak, is being criticized about handling the policies of trying to figure whether the policy is right or looking for the right policies. The increase of COVID-19 in South Asia is stressing budgets and reordering national and international security priorities. So acknowledging a few bullets, one, the grand strategic goals, geostrategic plans, and diplomacy campaigns are being executed by great power rivalry during the pandemic will lay a course for conceivable disorder or a new order persuading the forthcoming global order. The United States and EU nations are advancing to the IPR, justified by the just concluded G7 summit amid the pandemic with Bring Back a Better World on ecology, economy, infrastructure, connectivity with the richest nation and 10 democracies, one of them India. So NATO and the 29 allies meeting ended as an alliance stronger than with a common defense, including Russian aggression and strategic challenge from China and America's cyber activities, terrorism, and climate change. And the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been spelling out that China-United States relations are facing their most serious challenge since the establishment of the diplomatic ties. Third, Prime Minister Modi's diplomatic approach with neighborhood first policy, as well as to bring together the multilateral organizations, SAARC and BIMSTEC, is being contended. The traditional security architecture is being questioned. Now, the second part is, though the arc of the Himalayas is 2,500 kilometers, the 5 countries' bordering distance is more than 5,800, and China borders every part of them. Militarizations of the Himalayas can be an example of 2 powers' interests being more political with risks of threat in defending the Himalayan region. The Himalayan region can be divided into 4 subsectors. Far western is the Aksai Chin and Ladakh. Western sector could be Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. Center and the middle would be Bhutan, Sikkim, India, and Nepal. And the eastern sector would be Arunachal Pradesh. Though all 6 mountain passes from China to Nepal are vibrant and strategically promising, the Kalapani area, which is 416 kilometers to Delhi, located at the northwest end, and the easternmost Alongchungola is 41 kilometers to the Siliguri corridor, known as the chicken neck of India. Both of these areas are the only 2 districts that border both China and India. My part 3, I will examine 5 doctrinal imperatives. 1, changed geography. The Himalayas and south of the Himalayas are formidably changed as it is more accessible due to the variations in the environment, infrastructure development, and political interests and political will. The mountains that used to be barriers are flattening. Strategic communications networks are being constructed. Connectivity is not just physical and amongst bordering states, but ideas, values, cultures also are. President Xi Jinping visit to Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nepal from 2016 to 19, turning the relationship to strategic cooperation. Support to Pakistan in the UN on the revoking of Article 370. It's just few examples that adds to the political interests south of the Himalayas. The economic assistance and military engagements are assisting for political influence and strategic interest. China, CPEC, Nepal as a gateway to India with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the China-Himalayan Trans multi-dimensional networks, and China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, and Bangladesh-China-India-Myanmar Economic Corridor. So this positions China's firmness and a will to be a bridge to the Indian Ocean, 80% of China's energy resources go through the Malacca Straits. Second is the diverse geopolitical situation. So the militarizations of the Himalayas can be an example of two powers' interests being more political, with risks of threat in defending the Himalayan regions. For China, the province of Xinjiang and Tibet alongside the Himalayas is in the same way imperative for stability. So the recent surfacing of the border disputes between Nepal and India in the strategically, militarily vital, economically viable, and religiously vivacious Kalapani area is another case in point of the importance of the Himalayan region. Third is great power rivalry in the shifting in our part of the world. So 5 policy documents of the United States. The United States and China rivalry are emerging in our regions when the United States national security has already established China and Russia as competitors. India and China's confrontation is evidently very visible. The new Biden administration has said that his administration was prepared for extreme competitions with China, but that his approach would be different than his predecessor. Quote, "I am not going to do it the way Trump did. We are going to focus on the international rules of the road," unquote, which has been well brought out by the G7 and NATO meetings. The focus and priority of the United States and NATO defense assets in the region, the building up of Chinese defense assets along the Tibetan Plateau, and India's neighborhood first, Act East policy, and the activities of Quad nations are all indications of a larger power game compromising the competitions between the two largest economies of the world. Therefore, the upcoming geopolitical evolution of the Himalayan region is an important area of concern. Fourth, if the geopolitical compulsions is viable, values-based dimension is also in roads. Democracy versus communism is underway. Economy will continue and remain as a tool of national power. Military threat more visible than before. And the fifth is resource competition. I will highlight just 2. A hydropolitics test is well observed. 10 rivers sources, 9 countries and 7 South Asian greatest rivers, forming the largest runoff from any single location out of Tibet of China. 40% of the world's population depends upon rivers and have their headwaters in Tibet, including the Ganges, where the river system of Nepal connect. Nearly half the water, 48%, run directly into India. Second is the rare earth minerals. 90% of the REM, and essential for every single electronic devices, or 44 million metric tons required by the world today, is supplied by China. After China, based on reserve volumes, are Vietnam, Brazil, Russia. US holds 1.5 million metric tons. Afghanistan is now sitting on vast reserves of minerals, including 1.4 million tons of REM, the values of which resources are between $1 to 3 trillion. So let me conclude now. Even if India and China celebrate their 71st anniversary of their diplomatic ties, the June 2020 sequence of unarmed scuffle along the disputed border in the far western Himalayan is a fatal clash, marks the final casualties put up with after 45 years, is more involving resource politics of water and rare earth minerals, potentials land for military viability, and geopolitical discourse. One of the fundamentals of India and China relationship is politics of space, with political interests, resources management, and security leverages for stability, with economy as a priority, as well as shift in people's perception. Incidents in the Himalayan region happens with an intent. Indications hint on possibilities. Countries will have to look at the occurrences in the Himalayas with possibilities of long-term strategic impacts, with the question, what is the great game? Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Saab, and thank you particularly for raising the issue of the competition for resources, rare earth, minerals, and especially water, and how the Tibetan plateau is the source of 9 rivers of the Indus water basin. On this solemn occasion, let me also say that in 3 weeks, we'll be celebrating the 86th birthday of the 14th Dalai Lama, His Holiness. So I would also, on behalf of this forum, wish him a very happy birthday and many happy returns. Now, may I request General Gurmeet Singh, if he's here, to begin his presentation. And General Saab, floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. First of all, my Jain to each one of you, my compliments. And it's a matter of honor and a pleasure for me to be on the platform of GCTC. And it is touching, it is 15th June. For me, this topic, this day, as an army man, I feel very, very, I would say, very happy that you chosen this day for, and even the heading which has been given as on 15th June, decoding 1 year of Galwaan face-off. Thank you for giving this heading. In fact, for me, it is touching too, because Dr. Alka was my guide for research on India-China boundary issue when I was a colonel. So it's my compliments to you, ma'am, for teaching me all that. First of all, how do I look at 15 June per se? To me, 15 June is a watershed when the things started taking a turn. 15 June is a facilitator to understand what China is all about, because understanding China is very difficult. I visited China 7 times, and I think it's the biggest challenge for the world to understand what China is. So it has facilitated the world and India too to understand what China is. And next is to know your own self-worth. I think in the combat, you come to know what your self-worth is, what you do from that point of view. And for that, 15 June is a very important date for us to understand our own self-worth. 1 Mahavir Chakra and 5 VRC is a very big mark in the military history. Next is that it has busted many a myths, perceptions, and many a narratives. Another aspect is that 15 June has brought in a new phase of diplomacy, new confidence in diplomacy. In fact, earlier we used to be cautious of what we speak. I would say we were over good in English and the expression, and we were caring too much for sensitivities of China. This is what I felt. But now there are many changes onto that. Because the topic has been kept so beautifully by GCTC on 3 topics, 3 sub-issues. One is India-China relations, second is the current trends, and third is the future paradigm. My compliments for these 3 bullets that which you are aiming. And as an army man, one only looks at the bullseye. Now, looking at the India-China relations, I think what Foreign Minister, what Minister of External Affairs, India has told, it is at crossroad. And crossroads have always spelled that the direction can change. Next is that he said it can't be business as usual. So there will be changes. Then actually there's a contest of where to start, what's the priority, what's the focus, and where to take a turn. Because from China perspective, they are still in the old mold of saying that let border issue be there, let LSE clarification not yet completed, but keep continuing on the trade, market, and bilateral relationship. But I think India has very categorically said that first, disengagement. That is the priority focus for India. I think that's where the contest and the delay in disengagement, de-escalation, and de-induction is there. So I think there's a lot of candidness which has walked into the diplomatic arena. Otherwise, it used to be like DI of diplomacy always says 2 point of view. But I think now we come to a scenario where it has got to be 1 or 1+. I think that's the way it is. You know, the erstwhile erstwhile mold of diplomatic exchanges, I have also participated in a number of meetings of annual dialogue and joint working expert group meetings. We used to be very sensitive about how China will feel about it. What is the concern of China? Don't talk anything about Dalai Lama. Don't talk about Tibet, Taiwan. But I think it's changing now. Next is, I would say there's a certain visible polarization which is coming up in the world. If you look at the G7, then you find that democracies are trying to come together on the challenges which have been posed by authoritarian, or I would say other side in the whole perspective of how to look at the current threats and challenges, and the COVID challenge and the economy challenges too. Next is, I think, after the COVID, we already had 17.5 crore infected, 37 people lost, deaths. And now, in this new one, what reset will be there from the economy point of view and other geostrategic issue is, I think, how the relations will be formed. Apart from this, the bilateral relations will be interplay of all elements of power, whether it is economy, technology, information, military and diplomacy. So I think there will be a shift in how the relations will be calculated hereafter. Now, coming on to the trends, definitely 15 June was a watershed. I think after 15 June, what happened, there was a jointness, oneness in India as far as the public is concerned. Boycott of Chinese product was visible. I believe, I'm not sure about it, that about 40% there has been an effect on this in a big way. Next, the government took decision on banning application, which has been copy-pasted by others too. Apart from this, if you look at the G7, which is just, I think, a day or two back, they are looking for alternative to BRI. They know that BRI, although focused on infrastructure, but it had a package which cannot be explained in a normal diplomatic term, but definitely it had a package of debt trap. It had a package of economic coercion. It had a package of economic colonization. And I would say this is the first time in the G7 they come out with words like Xinjiang, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and they said forced labor, human rights, and they come very strongly on these points. And apart from this, I would say that they also showed their concern on East China Sea, South China Sea, etc. So this is a shift and the change which is taking place. Also the shift in WHO going in for new phase, a new effort in finding out the origin, investigation, because last time they didn't have the needed cooperation. I think the things are changing. People are picking up confidence. In fact, what Australia has done for the world, in the first phase, they came out very strongly that origin must be found out of the corona. And now they're again repeating it the next year. I think that's a big change. In fact, change from Trump to Biden is that it's a style and the method may be changed. But I think the focus on threat, although it was more direct earlier, now it may be more polished, but the aim is same. Now, looking at the third bullet of future paradigm, I think future paradigm actually spells out that there will be a reset, there will be a decoupling. I think supply chain will have to be calculated again by the world. It can't be with one head. It has already troubled the world in a big way. Another alternative that the world will have to find out in future is alternative to BRI. Already 40 plus trillion rupees are being, US dollars are being collected to give assistance in the infrastructure development of the developing nations or where it is needed. Apart from that, Taiwan subject is changing. I think earlier everyone was respecting one China principle of in reference to Taiwan, but it is actually undergoing a change. In fact, Professor Amitabh had so beautifully said, world has changed for worst. I would say that the world has got new challenges now, and those challenges where hard decisions resolved and the will be needed. So I think many changes will definitely come. I also want to calculate in my mind, I want to share with you that the collusiveness of Pakistan and China, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, I would say the very fact that it is being anchored, planned on the plane of the sovereignty of India, in reference to POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, and effect the collusiveness, depth, etc., which had on the Pakistan. I don't know what will be the effect on Pakistan, but definitely it is not going to be positive. It is going to be quite negative for sure. Then apart from this, I would say Indo-Pacific region, as it was spelled out from the summit meeting of the Quad leaders, and the way it has been spelled out again in the arena of the G7, I think this is going to be the futuristic conflict zone. I think I may be touching 7 minutes. I can see Professor Amitabh's look. So at this moment, I would say that the change, the shift is definite. I think, to be very honest, it's very difficult for the world to tolerate the loss of 37 lakh. It is more than annual calculation, any parameters of world war. And to be honest, China has taken a track where wolf diplomacy cannot be tolerated by anybody. Their belligerence, opening all fronts, what they've done in the East Ladakh, I think the world will naturally, like what the Prime Minister said at the forum of the G7, that we are natural ally to G7. So I think that shows where is the trend and where is the future. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, General Saab, and thank you for putting that in a context. And there was no way I was going to interrupt you because of your background as the Corps Commander of the 15th Corps. So, and I would dare not interrupt serving or a former commander of a corps so close to where my permanent residence is and whose security is dependent on the great sacrifices that the 15th Corps has made. But let me now begin by asking Professor Christian Connert. I'm sorry if I got your name slightly wrong, but I assume that you are from Germany. If then it's Christian Connert, is a K more guttural. You can probably tell us what your affiliation is, and then we would like to hear your perspective. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be here with you today, and I'm deeply honored to come after such distinguished speakers who've basically said all the important things that were to say on the topic already. But I think I'm really very honored to be here to remember this particular day with you and to think a little bit about the geopolitics that is happening in our world. And of course, the important points have already been made. Just a little background for myself. I'm Professor of Policing Security at the University of South Wales in the United Kingdom. I'm originally, as you rightly said, I'm originally German, but I have lived in the UK longer than in Germany, in fact. So I'm dual national. I'm both German and British. And as such, I guess I have perspective to bring to this, which is kind of a European perspective, if you like. So I don't have the deep expertise that, of course, the previous speakers have had. And so as such, I think it's important to kind of put it a little bit in the perspective. My main area of research is, of course, on counterterrorism. I'm leading a Jean Monnet network on EU counterterrorism that involves 14 different countries across Europe and of course also in the Middle East. And I do a lot of work on that particular area. And I work a lot on international security. So I thought I want to put this a little bit in a larger geopolitical perspective that, of course, a number of speakers have already talked about. I think the most important point that came out of a lot of the speakers is, of course, how China is increasingly seen as as a threat. I think one of the things that have happened over the last 12 months that has really pushed this agenda a lot is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And initially, this was something that was expressed by former US President Donald Trump, but has been increasingly accepted in the wider world. So I want to focus a little bit on how this might have happened. So on the one hand, we have the larger geopolitical events that you've talked about in terms of China. We have the growing geopolitical power, geoeconomic power of China. A number of very important scholars over the last decade or two have been wondering whether this growing geopolitical power is ultimately going to lead to a great war, and there's been a lot of academic writing on that particular topic. We've seen, of course, this economic power also translating into military power, and an increasingly a certain willingness to use that military power in actual conflicts. If we look more broadly speaking in the United States, of course, there's been an increased recognition of the particular geopolitical threat. It's been, in a sense, pushed aside the discussion that were maybe 20 years ago when we were talking more about China as a possible partner in establishing a kind of a balanced order in the world, to one that is far more distinguished by systemic rivalry and, of course, by the threat to the democratic order that increasingly democratic countries are perceiving. In the European Union, we've also seen that the broader framework has seen the European Union develop more and more in terms of its own security identity. European Union has put a much stronger focus on developing security cooperation amongst one another. Permanent cooperation has even been talked to an extent of establishing a European army at some point. This is something that might still be a number of years off, but I think it's still important to point it out because, of course, it relates to a certain willingness of the European Union increasingly to take its security obligations more seriously. This relates also to, in particular, the perception in Europe of more aggressive, perhaps also more threatening Russia, in particular when it comes to some of the conflicts related to Ukraine, Crimea. We've seen them also in the Middle East and so on. So that has pushed the European Union, in a sense, in that particular direction. For the United Kingdom, as you are very aware, of course, the United Kingdom has left the European Union. Brexit has been the predominant topic. And as you've seen, the latest reviews in terms of UK defence have been a significant increase in spending in UK defence. So the United Kingdom sees itself very strongly as a future global power that is also going to contribute significantly to global security. And in this particular direction, we need to see the kind of threat that increasingly China has posed. And as some of the previous speakers have pointed out, we've just had the G7 summit, where this was brought out in particular by some of the discussions that, of course, US President Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson have had, the new signing of a so-called New Atlantic Charter that is basically pursuing an agenda to an extent to provide a democratic alternative to the increasing rise of China. The G7, and perhaps also, as you rightly mentioned, this perception of an increased alliance with countries that are democratic, in fact, like India, that provides a certain democratic alternative to the rising power, and that is meant to also provide an economic alternative, in fact, to the rising power of China. The European Union, that just as President Biden wanted to take over in December, signed an investment pact with China, has put that particular investment pact on the back burner. In fact, after China had sanctioned a number of EU officials, in particular the European Parliament, and that went down extremely negatively in the European Parliament in Brussels. And as a result of that, the investment pact has been put in a deep freezer, one might say, and that certainly has meant that the European Union, especially now that President Biden has established himself much more on the international scene, is allying itself much more strongly and this. So all of this is to say, in a sense, that if we look at the larger geopolitical developments, we see that it focuses, in a sense, a spotlight on the role of India. India as the favorite, in a sense, ally of Western countries in the particular region for a number of different reasons, but notably also, of course, because of what I said earlier in terms of the systemic rivalry that the West feels that China and Russia are increasingly undermining the democratic institutions of the West, are undermining the democratic institutions of Europe, undermining the democratic institution of the United States. And as a result of that, the perception in Western countries that it is imperative to work very closely with China and to provide, in fact, with India, I'm so sorry, with India, and to provide an alternative to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative in particular, that has really created an additional perception, in addition to the COVID-19 crisis, that it is a dangerous perception to let China rise and not provide an alternative that will ultimately protect. I think I'm already being looked at, so I should probably not take too much longer, but I'll be looking forward to your questions, and I'm very much looking forward also to the rest of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Conrad, and thank you for the perspective that you bring, and I had the chance to actually look at your impressive curriculum vitae, and I realized that your perspective is not just European English, but also Welsh and German, and that you're the Jean Monnet Professor for Counterterrorism at the University of South Wales, and that you did your initial education at one of the best centers of international relations in the UK, the University of Aberystwyth. So I think your perspectives is incisive, important, and I think reassuring for many of us. Thank you so much for those words. And now I hope I can now request my colleague, formidable colleague on China, Professor Alka Acharya, who's written extensively and who's influenced policy as a member of the National Security Advisory Board, as also an erstwhile director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, to give us her perspective. Professor Acharya. You're muted, Alka.
Okay. Thanks, Amitabh, and thanks to the GCTC and Aditya for interesting me into coming here, because I find that it has been an immensely interesting set of perspectives that I have heard. So it has been extremely instructive for me personally. I attended parts of the first session as well, where it was all about India and China. In fact, Aditya had given me to understand that the first session would be on India and China, and the second one would be the global perspective. So, so I tried to construct some responses to the what I hope is the objective of this session, which is really to look at how 1 year of after 1 year of Galwaan, how do we look at ourselves in the world, and how does the world look to us? Very nice to have heard Gurmeet. He is his usual passionate and very enthusiastic speaker as always. And Gurmeet, it's going to always be very sad for me personally that you never finished that PhD. We wrote a really great synopsis, and I was very enthused by what you were bringing. But I just hope that you will do it sometime. Okay, now let me quickly get to the points that I had marshaled. As I said, that I was thinking about the global perspective, and some very interesting points have been made by the speakers earlier. Amitabh, in his opening remarks, of course, said very aptly there are no easy answers. And in fact, the first thing that actually strikes one when one looks at the global scenario today is that it is highly fluid. And it's not just an outcome of the pandemic. The pandemic has, of course, created more problematic issues in one way, and opened up new avenues for cooperation in another way. But I would argue that pandemic or no pandemic, we would still be faced with a highly fluid scenario in terms of this larger big power politics that speakers before me have also referred to, had that got underway since, of course, Trump left office, and in many ways, the post-Biden big power politics is still working itself out. Biden will be meeting Putin. He has started a new track with China. And while on the one hand, he is, of course, getting back to Europe, America is back in the world, and all the rest of it, we still are looking at a United States groping for the kind of equations that it now wishes to establish with China and Russia. And while speakers before have referred to this big kind of tussle that is going on, the great threat that China poses, is it a second world war or not, a second Cold War or not? What is the nature of this big power politics? Is it ideological? I think these are all questions up in the air. And I do not subscribe, of course, to the notion that this is a second Cold War that we are going to see unfolding, although they are definitely, and as Biden has very clearly stated, there are definitely ideological elements into it. But I speak from the position of an academic, so I'm not really going to just get very emotional about it for the moment, for this purposes of this discussion. Although this past 1 year, as I think Gurmeet had also mentioned, that there has been a kind of a very strong unifying sense in India about the threat that China poses. So that apart, the point is that this is the central question of our times in the world today, that what is the nature of China's challenge to the world? Is it an ideological one? Is it one where an authoritarian power is actually showing that it can rise to riches, taking roots other than what the liberal democracies showed us? Is it about a power that now has the capacity to reshape the international architecture, political and economic? So I think we are still not yet clear, and other speakers have also mentioned that what is the nature of the Chinese threat? Who feels threatened? I mean, speakers have very casually used the word, the argument that the world is feeling threatened by China. But I think we as scholars, we need to actually unpack this. Is the world united absolutely against China? That China is feeling the pushback to its assertions, to its aggressive policies, to its hegemonic behavior is evident. The fact that Xi Jinping himself has taken a step back from that wolf warrior diplomacy, that he is trying to tone down China's very strident kind of notes on the world diplomatic stage is quite clear. And as there would be a greater reaction to this assertiveness of China, I think the Chinese will be forced to reckon with this opinion. But at the same time, we should not be carried away and start talking glibly about the world uniting against China and therefore making the situation very clear in one nonsense. Because at the end of the day, we also have to understand that even as this flux that is taking place in terms of the big power politics, there are realities which are continuing to hold the hands, to restrain the kind of positions that are being taken, whether it is in the developed world, whether it is among European countries, Asian countries, because we have this reality that by the time this power equations will sort themselves out, by the time we start seeing actual battle lines being drawn, by the time we see that countries are ranging on one side or the other, we also have a situation where the United States is going to be taken over. Very soon, China will be, both in terms of the scale of its economy and the GDP. There are, of course, various predictions. Some say 2025, some say 2028, some say 2032. But the fact is that China is going to be overtaking the US very soon. And there is a very significant difference here, that at the height of the US and American Cold War, the Soviet Union was never more than 40% of the American economy and the GDP. Whereas now you have a situation where Chinese have crossed more than 70% of the American, the size of the American economy. So I think the nature of this shift is going to, and this economic heft and clout is being accompanied by China's massive strides in expanding its technological capacities, in moving into the new areas of IT, in expanding its footprint. So I think what we need to understand is how the countries are also looking at this new power. What are the kind of opportunities? So we need to actually do a good pros and cons about what are the kind of opportunities China offers to a large number of countries, what is the kind of threat, and then take an assessment about whether we are looking at the world versus China. So I think that's the first important point that I would like to make. Second would be the globalization, and this is tied up because the question that emerged as the Americans and the Chinese start to clash and the trade war begins, whether we were beginning to see the end of globalization, that whether Europe would retreat into itself and the Asian countries would form their own little continent, that globalization as we knew it since the last decade of the 20th century was winding to a close. And I think today the debate is still open. There are people on both sides, some who say that globalization will be strengthened and some who say, I personally feel that we are looking at a recalibration, but a continuation of globalization nonetheless. And this is where we need to see where a country like India is going to pitch itself. Because frankly, when we are looking at the new kind of, say, global value chains, or the new kind of attempts to refashion the way in which trade and commerce is being carried out, is it really possible that we can completely change this, reinvent these global value chains, or even the Asian value chains? There was an interesting quote I found here in reading something in this context, which was that talking about refashioning global value chains and somehow putting China into the cold is superficially very attractive because of the threat that one feels, but it is a problematic proposition. Global value chains do not emerge in the space of 4 or 5 years. It's to do with a whole lot of factors. So I think we need to be very careful about how we face this challenge that China is posing to the world in the context of globalization, and look at realistically what is possible, because obviously companies will be voting with an eye on their profits. People will be voting with an eye on the opportunities that they can have to. Okay, the last point that I'm going to make is this regionalism, because here is where the India-China challenge is going to come up in a far more significant way as far as the larger against the larger backdrop of these changes. And here I believe, and I would like to really take on General Rashid's point and even General Basnat's point about, that we have to start thinking very, very concretely in terms of a shared neighborhood, shared interests, mutual interfacing of our problems, and coming together to fight the challenges which are going much beyond traditional security. I think unless we look at the whole question of regional integration or regional positioning as a unit, as to begin with in South Asia, but of course in the larger Asian kind of context, the China challenge is really going to be way beyond India. Because for many countries across Asia, from Southeast Asia at one end to Central Asia, we find that China has become virtually irreplaceable partner economically. So we need to be able to look at where and how we need to move into these newly emerging scenarios, newly emerging groupings, and not really take a step back and go back into the protectionist strategies of yore. I think these are the three main kind of trends which are going to, which are fluid, which are in a transition, but which are also offering spaces if we think rationally, if we think without really being swayed too much by these large kind of ideas that it's China against the world. I do believe, as a scholar, it is not as black and white as is sought to be argued. Okay, I'll stop there, Amitabh. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Alka, for that really nuanced perspective, also drawing out on the challenges for globalization and within our regional neighborhood. Thank you. And now I'll request Professor Monu Nalpat, who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting for a long time, but whose incisive thinking I have been greatly appreciating and been inspired for a long time, ever since he was the one of the editors of the Times of India, before he acquired this great Dronacharya role as Professor of Geopolitical Studies, and brings to bear that larger long-term strategic perspective. Professor Nalpat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amitabh, and I must say that over the years, I have come considerably closer to some of your views than I was in the 1990s, as you may have noticed from my writing. Thank you very much. The point was, it was impossible to miss this session for a simple reason that none of us can forget the martyrs of Galwaan. And none of us can forget the sacrifice that they have made, just as none of us can forget the immense contribution made by the armed forces to the security of each and every one of us. So in a very small way, participation in this extremely important session, and I'm delighted that an old friend is chairing it. Aditya is also a good friend, and I can see several familiar friends in, among speakers and audience. Thank you very much, Amitabh, on this day of remembrance of the sacrifice of the 20 who lost their lives at Galwaan. Anyway, so that's why I'm here, and I think, and that's why I think all of us are here today. I simply want to say that we have been looking at trends, linear trends, and assuming that linear trends will continue. I would like to point out that in the days when there was a talk of a G2, that is United States and China, the United States, there was considerable asymmetry between the United States and China. As Professor Acharya has pointed out very correctly, that asymmetry is really no longer there. The Chinese are rapidly catching up, including in artificial intelligence, which is, as you know, the most important component of the next war, a kinetic war. Having said that, I'd like to say that 2008, in my mind, was the fire break, because 2008, 2009, you had this financial crash. And in this financial crash, it was caused, in my reckoning at least, and I must confess that all this is based on experience as well as some reading, etc. On the greed, mostly of the greed of Wall Street, but partly individuals in London, Frankfurt, maybe Zurich, other locations. Definitely not anybody in Asia, Africa, or Latin America, or I may be loath to say it, in China. In the GCC people, for example, a huge amount of money was lost by the GCC. A huge amount of money was lost by international investors because of this greed. But the effect of that was essentially to knock down a great degree of the confidence of the omniscience and omnipotence of America, which translated into a similar feeling about, American professionals, companies. Even if you're a small American company, you tended to boss over much larger companies from countries such as India, which today are being taken a little more seriously than they were in the days of the 1990s. When you remember, you remember your own home state, the situation at that point in time, it was not very pleasant. So I'd like to say that was a point, that is right. And from that time onwards, I think the Chinese were, I won't say they're delighted, but I can't say that they were very unhappy about the fact that the Western world in particular really became on the defensive after that time. And I think, George W. Bush's wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, in all these locations, NATO, we're talking about a European army here. I'm sorry to say that a European army and the Americans together, and with some other partners cobbled up, they couldn't succeed in sending a very motley crew of individuals that you and I have been studying since the 1990s, the Taliban. The Taliban are hardly the ferocious force that, to which, I'm sorry to say, almost a surrender document was signed during the time of Donald Trump, and that document has been ratified by Joe Biden. So that was, in a sense, I think possibly an epiphany for China, in the sense that they've always had this feeling that they should once again be number one. They're civilizationally, they believe that they've been, at least for about 2,500 years, I think they usually double that in their conversations, but I would say realistically about that much. So the last 600 or so years was a blip. The last 120 years or so, till the coming of the Communist Party was a blip. They need to be once again at the top of the table. I think they're looking at the way in which the metrics have changed in China's favor against the United States, against the European Union, and may I say it's changed in favor of Asia. So far as Americans are concerned, I think they do enormously more trade with Asia than they do with Europe. Although Joe Biden still, of course, believes the transatlantic relationship to be the relationship, and he has acknowledged that. I think, as we said a few hours ago, I'm afraid that he may not be right. It is the Indo-Pacific that is the new theater of not only the future, but the present. In that, 2020 was, to my mind, an event similar to 2008, 2009. This is, the more I have discussed this with experts in virology, and I think, in our university, we have experts in different fields. In other places, you have experts in different fields. And over the years, Amitabh, you and I have built up our relationship so that once you have a relationship, it's not really surrendered. It continues, and part of it is the fact that you have a free discussion. It's more or less clear to all of them. It was clear a year ago, and some of the people who are in Atlanta, in Washington, they told me all this a year ago. And I used to ask them, why is it you're not going public? And they said, if we go public, we'll be laughed at by academics and by scientists and others. And they'll they'll doubt our quote-unquote scientific soundness now. I mean, and of course, the 2020 is made things a little different, although for much of 2020, that fable continued, that it all came from a bat. There was no intermediate vector. I mean, between the bat, there was a vector in the case of MERS, there was a vector in the case of SARS-1. There's been no vector, even by the Chinese, have not been able to come up with a credible vector for SARS-2. Well, whatever the reasons are, therefore, I mean, I may be wrong, but I think it's not inevitable. I think, Alka has been talking in terms of almost an inevitability, like the inevitability of the rise of America, or an indispensability. Well, I'd like to say there was a CEO of an American company I talked to quite some time ago, and he was talking about a particular employee, and on the telephone he was saying, fire that guy. So I told him, what's the problem? Why are you firing him? Well, he's become indispensable, or thinks he's indispensable, and the minute a guy is indispensable, or thinks he's indispensable, he has to leave the company. Absolutely, for the sake of the company, you have to leave the company. So I think China started feeling indispensable, and I think the rest of the world, a lot of the rest of the world is responding in that fashion. But I quite agree with Professor Acharya. The Chinese are, in my sense, going back to the old Lin Biao thesis, the cities versus the villages, Asia, Africa, Latin America as the villages. And of course, there are a few European countries, Greece, Italy, which they have influenced a lot. And they would like this to come to them. All right, that's point number one. There is a small competitor, not very small actually. It's also 1.4 billion people, and it has a long history of supporting freedom movements. I think long before the Palestinians were recognized as state, they had an embassy in Delhi. Long before the African National Congress was recognized anywhere. I think we gave it the honor and respect that the ANC had always deserved. So I'd like to say that that's not the only competitor, that's not the only theater of competition for China. The theater in which there, the Lin Biao thesis of the villages and the cities, because India is still a village. China claims to be a village, but it seems to be, if this is a village, I mean, there are very few cities that are villages in the definition in which Lin Biao meant it. But I'd like to say that, as far as India is concerned, it's very much a village, and it is going to be a competitor for influence in China. And as Galwaan has shown us, sometimes you have to take hard choices. One of the problems that we have seen across India for a very long time, and you and I know, Amitabh, that was quite some time, some states in India, in the 1980s, Punjab, in the 1990s, Kashmir, have paid a very severe price for hard choices not being taken and accepted early enough. They are finally taken after, frankly, a lag of time, and during that time, significant damage has been done. Well, I think, frankly, that what happened at Galwaan was, in a sense, a signal, the bravery of those soldiers who confronted the Chinese, who frankly believe that what does the Indian army? They don't have this artificial intelligence, they don't have this huge budget, they don't have so many drones or any of these facilities. Well, they got a lesson that ultimately it's a human being that counts. And that's my second point, Amitabh. I'm going to keep to your limit, don't worry, which is the human material in India is absolutely phenomenal. Not just in India, the human material that comes from India. You go to Silicon Valley, you go to San Jose, and sometimes I've wandered into some of these tech studios at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you see some chap coming, may have come from a party or whatever, he naps off, suddenly he wakes up and does brilliant software. Usually those chaps are Indian. They may be Indian American, they may be Indian Indian, they may be South African Indian, Singaporean Indian, they're Indian. And so that human material is there. So on the one hand, you have the attraction of this huge village. equal in size to you, at least in population. Then you have the huge potential of the people of India. It's a different matter that policy has not really developed that potential. And I'd like to say I've never hidden my respect for Chinese Communist Party or my regard for Chinese people. But I'd like to say that I regard our people as possibly a little better than the Chinese people. But I think the Chinese Communist Party has been much more successful than any government in India has been in unlocking that potential, but it's there. That's the second kind of point. And the third point we're talking about, what does China want for India? Now, somehow I'd like to say that I've listened to a lot of scholars, experts, analysts who have been to China many times. I must confess, I must have been there at least 4 dozen times, if not more. But I don't pretend to understand China very much. But I think I do understand, based on the kind of what they did about this particular pandemic. First of all, hiding information about it for about 5 to 6 weeks. Secondly, spreading it across the world during that time in flights from Wuhan and Hubei, the province in which Wuhan is there. And thirdly, frankly, completely covering up. I mean, if you're innocent, you don't take the Fifth Amendment on everything. If you go to an American court and you take the Fifth Amendment on every question, what does it mean? It means you have something to hide. And the Chinese have taken the Fifth Amendment for the entire trajectory of the virus. And of course, now I possibly, we'll be welcome to visit the Wuhan laboratory. I'm very certain it would have been sanitized in the first 45 days. The Chinese are very efficient people. It's a little more than 45 days. So I'd like to point out that I think that has made a change in the world. The Indo-Pacific, even Joe Biden, who frankly is a Europeanist to the core, like Hillary Clinton, like so many others, Bill Clinton, for example, who completely ruined any chance of a rapprochement with Russia when there was a very good chance of rapprochement. And the influence of, frankly, Europe, which is obsessed with Russia, when frankly, Russia is just a force multiplier for China. I mean, I don't want to use similes here, but if you're concentrating on Russia, you need to concentrate on the Sino-Russian alliance, and the word Sino comes before the word Russian. And if you don't do that, well, and if you focus on Russia, that's something that the Chinese will be extremely happy about, very happy about. So I would only like to say, Amitabh, I think it's an inevitability that India join the democracies, that India go, frankly, along with the democracies. I'm very happy about the Quad. I would like to see, for example, when next time a kinetic war comes, and I think it's only a question of when, not whether, for a simple reason, the objective of China is to ensure that India never actualizes its potential. Why? Because if it does so, decoupling, which is an inevitability according to me, because tech is at the heart of warfare. And the Chinese concept of warfare is, of course, as you know, it's not just kinetic. It's the health sector, agriculture, society. I mean, they love the fact that the right and left are fighting each other in India and the US. They love it. They love these little divisions in political parties, between different opinions. They just love it and ensure that in their own country, anybody who steps out of line, well, that person is gently persuaded to step back in line. So given that, I think it's an inevitability that even in India, and I'm told, I don't know, from responsible quarters in London, that there was an effort to get Galwaan and that particular conflict mentioned, although I think one particular country who was invited did not really like that. And I don't know what that one country is. It could be Australia, it could be South Africa, I don't know. And as a consequence, I think that was not included. I wish it were included, because you can't hide facts by window dressing. You can't hide the truth about science from window dressing. Just as in banking today, if you've got black money, I can tell you, you put it through the banking system, down the line, it will be exposed. It may not be, it will be done in Israel, United States, possibly the UK, and I'm reasonably certain substantially in India. In the same way, in 2020 January itself, it was clear that this was a lab-created virus. And the way in which you have SARS-1, the way in which these two variants, that is the Alpha and Delta variant, came within such a speed. And natural variants don't develop like that. It's like, you know, Amitabh, somebody becoming from 5 years old to 15 years old in about 6 months, and then 15 years old to 50 years old in another 6 months. It can happen if miracles happen in nature. But, you know, I believe in what Alfred Marshall said, natura non facit saltum. Nature makes no sudden leaps. I can't believe that the harmless bat virus got suddenly transformed in a matter of months to this deadly virus. And this deadly virus got transformed into 2 mutations in such a short period of time. There's something there which somehow even a non-scientist like me and many scientists personally do not accept, and this is showing up China. So 2020 has shown up China in the way that 2008-9 showed up the United States and the Western world as unreliable in terms of bringing up people from poverty. Today, China has been shown as a country that's certainly interested in bringing down poverty, but not in its main competitor, India. And as far as the United States is concerned, if it stops its tech supply chains, Europe, Germany, France, if it stops those supply chains, well, the Chinese are not going to be happy with that, and they're not going to regard them with the affection, frankly, that many people in Germany, France, and even India, United States regard the hopes. I remember in the 1990s, you and I used to go to the US, and you remember Bill Clinton. And everywhere you go, you used to meet people. Why don't you surrender Kashmir? And I used to point out to them, look, we have a lot of, you know, people in the Muslim community all over India. And fortunately, they're one of the most wonderful communities in the country. And they have remained wonderful all these years. And personally, I'd like to say I'm delighted that we have 200 million Muslims in India. It's a great strength to India. But then the reality is, Kashmir is important to India because of that, because we are not a state of a single religion. We are the state of multiple religions, and Kashmir, Nagaland, etc., illustrate that. So having said that, I'd like to say, I think a decoupling is inevitable. I think a conflict is already on, whether it's on social media, whether it's on societal tension. I've been researching through some of my team members, and they're absolutely brilliant. The manner in which social media is in the United States and India is now widening the gap between so-called left and right. I mean, I don't take this very seriously, left and right. Many people on the right have, you know, for example, economic views exactly on the left. Many people on the left have societal views of those on the right. So this left and right thing, in my view, doesn't make sense. You know, you're spinning in a circle if you go left, right all the time. But it's inevitable that a kinetic conflict may come. In that kind of a conflict, a partnership with the democracies in the form of a quad of each supporting one and everyone supporting the other is important, and that this decoupling is going to continue. Then, in my view, the Chinese have made a mistake because they have not yet reached the summit of the mountain. And believe me, if there is real decoupling in tech, in rare earths, and somehow it's very odd to me. Whenever we discover uranium, you always have 20 cases coming up that this uranium should never be mined. Coal, we are a coal superpower, and during the time when coal was okay, and the Chinese were burning it like anything, I mean, a lot of our coal remained underground, and today we have to import coal at huge cost. I mean, a lot of things don't make sense to me. But Amitabh, I hope someday China will make sense to our policymakers, and the imperative that China is presenting to the world will also make sense to our policymakers. I would again like to say I thank Aditya for allowing me in this very, very tiny way to show my respect and gratitude to the brave soldiers who confronted the PLA in Galwaan and showed them that this is what Indians are like, this is what India is like. And I'd like to say, once again, thank you. I am optimistic. Whether it's decoupling or whether it is the coming together of the democracies, I am very optimistic that China certainly post-2020 lacks the ability to block such trends. Thank you, Amitabh.
Thank you indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Nalpat, for those absolutely brilliant words of wisdom, incisive, thoughtful, and drawing from history and contemporary examples, as well as making the point about the importance of making hard choices, as well as ensuring that our human capital is able to reach its potential. I think those were really important words that you brought to bear on this seminar as we remember the martyrhood of our great soldiers in last year in Galwaan. Now we have Brigadier Vinod Datta is here with us. And Brigadier Saab, if you can take the floor, and then we'll invite Klasra Saab after you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It requires a lot of patience, like the Indian troops, to be speaking at the fag end of the webinar, because having listened to the eminent and stellar speakers, first of all, let me pay my homage to the Galwaan gladiators. And I would like to put it on record that, yes, Indian Army has always given the world the taste of it, grit, determination, fighting potential, whether it was Rezangla, whether it was 1967 operations where China was given a bloody nose, whether it was General Sagat Singh, who defied the orders of the government. Because I remember my father telling, who was a war veteran of 1962, telling me the orders used to come from the government that chauki khali kar do, I mean, leave the post and get back. It was the Indian leaders, military leaders, who stood with their guns and with the aim of a soldier, ek goli ek dushman, and they taught Chinese what they deserved. Now, let me take you back in the history, and what General Rashid had already pointed out, that yes, we should also talk of peripheral states. I'm going to touch upon that flavor also during my talk as it unfolds. You see, India and China, we have the same year of existence. Till say about 1980, we were on the same pace and road of development. But after 1980, China saw a dramatic and a determined growth in industry. And this was basically attributed by the Chinese leadership, who had a strategic vision. But they always say that China was ambitious, and there is no harm in being ambitious, but you have to clip your wings. You have to live in the world, what the world wants you to live within the parameters, because you cannot recast the world order once again. What China wants a multipolar world, but a unipolar Asia. China, as per the defense paper which has been just rolled out, they have already decided that by 2050, they are going to be the superpowers. They have already drawn that blueprint. China needs a sustainable marine economy. And that's why you will find the presence of China in South China Sea, because that is a gold mine what China has found out. It has got trillions of kgs of gas. It has got 10% of the fishery of the world. It has got the entire natural resources which are there. So just to sustain or to have a sustainable maritime strategy, China is keeping strategic, hooks or the anchors in South China Sea. China plays a money mantra role. If you see what General Rashid had been pointing out, if you see the string of pearls, you will find that the money which China is throwing in the neighboring countries, the kind of surrogacy conflict China has initiated against India, because China sees India as a rival, what Amitabh ji had brought it out. But China does not know that you see, the next century belongs to Asia, and China cannot have a free run, because India is not a small pushover. India is not 1962 India, where China is going to give you a free run. I'm afraid they have to rethink on these lines. Then you see, China, if you see the cartographic aggression, China shares boundaries with 14 countries, and it has got dispute with most of the countries. China claims, I mean, if I can use the word, that they are land mafias. China claims more territorial gains than what China is holding, little realizing that you cannot fool the world all the time. And now the world has woken up, and what Madhav had said, and he had said in a very, very comprehensive manner, that the China has to have a relook in the policies. If you see the Chinese territorial fetishism, it is not new. It has got a colonial footprint. It has got a nomadic footprint also. If you see the Yellow River civilization, which was totally devastated. If you see the Hanization of Tibet, if you see what is happening in Xinjiang, I mean, the writing is clear on the wall. Now, China has got a well-defined peripheral policy, and the core of which is the defense through development and forced migration. What they did in Tibet, they said, we are going to make it a, something like Shanghai. And we all know what kind of fate Tibet has met. Another point which I want to tell you is that when we talk of the regional countries or the peripheral countries, Pakistan remains the principle or the centrality of the foreign policy as far as China is concerned. The kind of investments China has made in Pakistan, I mean, everybody is aware of it, be it Gwadar, be it CPC, be it, any other airfields, I mean, whether it is in Miyawali or whichever. The kind of investments in infrastructure and in terms of various other things which they have done, I mean, it is known to the world. If you see in Sri Lanka, I mean, Hambantota is there. If you go back to, Coco Islands, the Chinese footprint is seen. Of course, it is denuding. If you see the kind of impression China has given to the world, and the democracies which have come up, and I think enough has been communicated on Quad or the democracies. If India is the biggest democracy in the world, China is the biggest autocracy in the world. And they had never expected that the Galwaan is going to give them such a bloody nose that they are going to repent for the rest of their history, as long as people are going to remember. If you see the Indian soldiers, even when they were sacrificing their life, there was one Nirmaljit Singh, Sipahi Nirmaljit Singh. He put two Chinese. He put his hands in his overcoat, and he jumped in River Shyok. And one chap he was already holding with the bayonet, with his hands or on his back. So he went down with 3 Chinese. So the number of casualties, I mean, of course, the world is aware of it. Another point which I want to tell you is, or the recommendations, since we are time critical, I will not take much of time, is that we have to have India has to have a very fine balance and a countervailing coalition with the other nations. And of course, the democracies, they always take the forefront, and which will support the various democracies. And what Amitabh has already brought out, that Quad doesn't mean that it is going to have only 4 corners. I mean, there can be many more Quads, or it can be Quad plus Quad. Second option, what India has is that the peripheral states, we have talked about Indonesia, we have talked about Vietnam, we have talked about Japan, we have talked about Taiwan. It is high time that the people should unite. You see, if you see the Quad countries, like China has got an issue with Senkaku Islands. China has got issue with India. And the kind of this cartographic aggression which they have done. If you see, the interest was lying in Aksai Chin. It is basically because of the strategic reasons. And if you see the geo-strategic imperatives which China is looking is, it is looking, because 85% of China lives in East China. The water sources, one of the panel speaker has already, spoken about it. They are looking for fresh water sources. So, so they are looking for resources. They are looking for minerals. They are looking for something substantial. Now, the coalition between Russia and Vietnam, you see, in this pandemic, Vietnam is one of the countries. There are only 5 economies which are looking up, and Vietnam is one of them. So there is a need to have a relook where Russia and Vietnam also have to be taken on board. And the Indian neighbors like Bangladesh, what General Rashid had already brought out, and General Basnath also gave a very, very insightful talk. Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and some of these countries have already seen that what kind of ruse the Chinese Communist Party is throwing. So they have read the writing on the wall, and they have already taken the corrective measures. Nepal, we have seen, there some of the districts were totally grabbed by China.
Brigadier Saab, I'll have to ask you to wind up. I'm sorry to do that to you.
Yes, sir.
This is one of the perils of coming towards the last.
I know. I'll just take 30 seconds, sir. I'm a soldier. I will always live up to the time. Now, building such balancing coalitions, which have been done in past, have to be done substantially and with a military vertical. And the Quad has started doing it. And let me tell you, India is a peaceful country where we always believe in peaceful coexistence. And I'm sure the imperatives, the way out, or the recommendations which I have given, these are my personal views. They are going to be, standing India as well as the neighboring countries in a good stead. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Saab. That was very, very useful, extremely thoughtful again. And now the final speaker listed for today is Klasra Saab, Kaswa Klasra from Pakistan. आप Klasra Saab अपना थोड़ा तारुफ भी दे दीजिए, and then you'll have to make your presentation. I'm sorry, very pointed and incisive because we. Marshal, I'll give you a couple of minutes. I understand that you have a pressing point to make. Marshal Sharma, I request you to make your point now.
Yeah, I have 3 points.
If
sorry
you-
that I.
As long as you can say it in 2 minutes.
Yes, yes, 2 minutes, not more than that. Thank you, Professor Amitabh. The first is regarding this tactical issue of hot springs, Gogra, and Depsang. You know, your younger people on the panel out there, younger people in GCTC need to understand the tactical issues as well. We've spoken far too much on the global picture as well as the strategic issues. Look, I feel that we should have handled Gogra, Hot Springs, and Depsang well before we tried to handle the Pengongse as well as the Kailash Heights. My personal view as an Air Force man is that we first done that and then come on to this. And I'm a little disappointed that we've now come to a deadlock where we have given in out there on Kailash Heights as well as Pengongse, and now we are not able to handle that. That's the first point. The second point is respect to what the Nepali journal as well as the Bangladesh journal had alluded to. You know, it is absolutely true. Now, communication is roads and, these sort of things which have already reached these heights. But please understand that in our lifetime, you can't come across the Himalayas to India, or India can go across the Himalayas out there and sustain it. It is not going to happen in a lifetime. So don't get very worried about that, that somebody can come across, etc. What is worrying is for the Nepalese to understand that they give full visibility the road width in Nepal to the Chinese out there. It can create a problem for us. And the last point, the third point, is regarding this entire militarization of the Tibetan Peninsula out there. I think it is happening far too fast. And probably the reason for that is not really India. It is something to do with the Central Asian republics. I think Ma'am Cleo may like to comment on this. And I think it is President Xi's, one of the ploys to convince the PLA that this is very important because India is a threat, but actually India is not a threat. And what he needs to actually do in the Tibetan Peninsula is to actually militarize it and make sure that he has some, pressure points in CAR. Thank you very much and good night.
Sir, you're on mute, sir. Professor Amitabh Mattu.
This is contagious. Klasa Saab, please speak.
Yeah, Amitabh ji, can you hear me now?
बिल्कुल ठीक. अब वक्त बहुत कम है. Please now say your piece.
Well, this is Kaswar Klasa. I am a journalist from Pakistan, based in Islamabad, and I'm an editor of Islamabad Telegraph. And I worked for India Today for 8 years as a Pakistan bureau chief, and the journey goes on still. I'm still working for TV9 Bharatwork as their bureau chief in Islamabad. So, well, I think when we talk about India and China standoff in Galwaan Valley, I think it was a win-win situation for the both countries. And I have an argument to space at that as well. Well, when we talk about Chinese perspective, Chinese has been, desperately wanting the world to know that they are a world leader now, and after United States. They have been improving their economy. They have been trying to, build up military and vice versa as well. When we talk about the standoff in Galwaan Valley, honestly, I have been spoken to a worthy gentleman in Islamabad and in the United States as well. Honestly, Chinese were not expecting a response which India gave them last year in 2020, June 2020 in Galwaan. They were not expecting it, believe me or not. So that shows that India has built up military, economy, and then overall a mood as well. So they are in a position to take on China or any other country in the world as well. China had with, I think, the Prime Minister Modi, with Prime Minister of India, they have built up great resources. They have built up a military. They have built like a scenario. And one of my my colleague was talking about the artificial intelligence, that he had a point that Chinese may have edge over Indian side when it's come to artificial intelligence. But believe me, India or not, Indians are not behind Chinese so far when it's come to artificial intelligence. And then, the technology as well. So, on the other hand, when we talk about China, they have established that they are the world leader and Asian giant as well. But on the other hand, Indian side has developed great relationship with United States. They have established link with four great countries in the world. I mean, Australia, United States, Japan, and other things as well. So there is not a huge difference between Chinese and the Indian side as well. Well, my Indian friend has given an Indian scenario. Beautifully, they have narrated things over there in when we talk about the India's and Chinese standoff in Galwaan Valley as well. But what India needs to do is to build up sources. They need to build up economy. They have already developed great relationship with the United States, the world #1 economy and the world superpower. I think it is a turning point. But China has edges in the region as well. As my panelists, my friends have already spoken about Pakistan's role, and when it comes to come to discuss Chinese, Indians, and Pakistani perspective, Pakistan has always been an integral part of foreign policy of China. China has poured billions of dollars here in Pakistan, and definitely, as they say, there are no free lunch. And Chinese side, they expect Pakistan to deliver as well. And Pakistan never disappointed their Chinese states as well. So I will not take much of your time because the time is short. I have a point that China has beautifully realized what they are one of the big superpowers. And believe or not, my Indian friends will believe them or not, but the reality is China is a superpower. But on the other hand, you cannot undermine Indian side as well. Indian side need to build up economy. They have already, built up very good relationship with the 4 or 5 great powers, including, Japan and then United States as well. So it's between 19. It's a fight between the grade 19 and grade 20 officers as well. So Pakistani side will always stand by Chinese side when you want to discuss the standoff between China and India. Pakistan will always support Chinese friends, and but there is no disappointed on the part of Indians as well. They need to just build up economy. Americans are there. And also, as one of my panelists, one of my friends has rightly pointed out that the G7 has made a loud and clear to the world that they are standing by the Indian side when it's come to the India and China standoff. And definitely, the China has chances to be isolated in the world as well. But lastly, I have a point that the China is going to establish its mark as a world superpower. And my Indian friends, the Indian side is not far behind, but India has also developed good relationship with the Russian, with the European, and most importantly, with the United States. So it's a clash of titans. And when titans like India and, China got engaged either in, Kashmir or in Galwaan Valley, so the world suffers. The better would be to sit down across the table. But Pakistani side has always, emphasized on sitting across the table as well. So I think it's the time for the two titans to sit across the table and, to solve their problems across the table, because China cannot undermine Indian side, and Indian side cannot undermine the China side. So in the greater interest of the region and the world, the both powers will have to sit down across the table. And China has established mark as a world superpower. Pakistan is already with them. Australia is there. Nepal is there. So I think it's the time for the global community to push these two titans, these two world superpower to sit across the table and solve the dispute either in Kashmir or either in Galwaan Valley. And lastly, I will endorse Major General Gurmeet Singh. He has a point that the standoff between China and India in Galwaan Valley has given a chance to Indian military to realize the world that they are 21st century's military, and either China or any country in the world cannot take them lightly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kasasa, for your very thoughtful views and putting it as a clash of titans. That's a very nice way of describing it. Okay, now if we have questions, in any case, I'm going to go back to whoever's left of our panelists to respond in 30 seconds each. But I can't see any questions in the chat box. So maybe I'll just ask the panelists who are still with us. I know Cleo Pascal has left. Major General Abdul Rashid has left. Oh, Cleo Pascal has not left. Yes. Cleo, please go ahead. You have 1 minute now, not 30 seconds, 1 minute to respond or to whatever's been said.
Luxury. So I'm again kind of just learning from the incredible depth and breadth of knowledge. I'm very grateful. The complexity of the situation is clear. The importance of bringing along the neighborhood is clear. But I think hopefully with all of the embedded issues that between the neighbors and things like that, I hope that what's come through even more clear is how much of a challenge we have with the Chinese Communist Party and how our regional neighborhood differences are nothing compared to what will come down the line if we don't figure out ways of working together to create an environment of security and stability and prosperity where the tip of the spear of what we saw in Galwaan is not repeated in health sector and the business sector and the infrastructure sector and all the other political warfare ways that the Chinese Communist Party has in mind, not just for India, but for the region and for the world. So understanding each other as we've done through this panel is a critical first step. And yes, we have differences, but we have more in common, and coming together and bringing those elements together in a comprehensive multinational defense is the way forward. And I thank GCTC for this opportunity.
Thank you, Cleo. And but I understand Major General Rashid and Vasnet has left. Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, if you're there and you want to say 1 minute, you're most welcome. Okay, then I know Kristan has left. So, Professor Acharya, 1 minute.
Amitabh ji, I have a minute.
No, thanks, Amitabh. I just want to say thank you very much once again. And I too join all my compatriots in saluting the brave hearts. And I think GCTC must be commended for bringing us all together here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alka. I'll come back to you, Kasasa. But General Gurmeet Singh, are you here? No. Professor Nalpat, I know, left. So now we have Klasra Saab and Brigadier Datta Saab. Two of you I can see on my screen. So whichever one wants to go first, 1 minute each. Brigadier Datta, you can say your 1 minute, and then I ask Klasra Saab to say his 1 minute. You're muted, sir.
Thank you very much. You see, most of the points have been covered, and I want to thank GCTC and Aditya for giving this opportunity, and very nicely moderated by Amitabh. And it was a treat listening to others and one is taking a lot of points home. And I wish that the Indian Army, which is known for digging its heels, and in fact, this Galwaan, crisis has given Indian Army a redesignation of the forces, and some of the forces have been re-engineered to be looking in Eastern Ladakh, and that's a great achievement for the Indian Army and for the nation. Jai Hind.
Klasa Saab, 1 minute if you have something to say, but you're not obliged.
Yeah, Amitabh ji, thank you very much. I have a point that, as my colleague said, that the Galwaan Valley has provided Indian Army as a great chance to redefine themselves and to make the world realize that they are in the 21st century, and they can pose threat to any nation in the world, including Pakistan, China, and United States as well. But the thing is, after this standoff, we have seen that the world has been divided into two halves. We have seen the great powers like United States, Australia, Japan, and others, I will not name Russia, they sided with the Indian side, and India side call it a day that the world's biggest powers, they come to side by them. And on the other hand, China has been desperately, trying to realize what they are a world power. But when we compare the China and Indian, after Galwaan Valley, the Indian side becomes more successful to us because they have gone at the spot of world superpower, and the world has acknowledged their standpoint as well. But on the other hand, we did not see any significant country other than Pakistan taking side with the China. So this is the scenario, the global perspective, as we gonna discuss. The Indian side stand, successful on this point. But when we discuss the regional, perspective politics, but there is a point that the Chinese and the Indian, the both of titans, the 19 and 20 grade officers, they need to take, sit across the table. And also the Pakistan is a party. When we discuss the regional powers, when we discuss Asia, I think the need of our is to sit across the table, and both titans need to sit across the table to save the world from another disorder. But on the other hand, I think on this platform, lastly, on this platform, I want to acknowledge that Galwaan Valley, the fight of Galwaan Valley goes to the Indian soldier. They have done very well.
Thank you.
They have done great job.
Thank you. I think we had an extremely stimulating set of presentations and an equally insightful discussion. What are the great takeaways from this discussion? First of all, I think we all recognize the bravery and the courage of the men who sacrificed their lives at Galwaan, who stood their ground, who demonstrated that Indians are ready to shed their blood to save the country. And there was a suggestion also that Colonel Santosh Babu's memory should be institutionalized in the form of a think tank or a center. More importantly, I think we talked a little about the large number of challenges that China continues to pose before us, whether it's strategic, whether it's economic, whether it is in terms of not just epidemic, but biological warfare or Chinese propaganda disguised as soft power. There are, as I have said in my opening remarks, no clear answers, but we have to work systematically, think strategically, and build partnerships. And also, whenever there is a possibility, engage in dialogue, recognizing, however, that you have to be prepared for the worst, given the kind of revisionist policies that Xi Jinping seems to have advanced as clearly a central part of Chinese foreign policy. Now, with those words, let me thank all of you, thank GCTC, the great Aditya Tikku, who has provided the leadership and the ability to persuade all of us to come together in a forum like this. So Aditya, back to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would now request Major Amit Bansal to kindly conclude and go.
Thank you, Aditya. So what we have understood from this discussion on the global perspective, the few points, I will not take much time. I'll take the few pointers are very clear. China did this adventure of Galwaan, but it did not expected the Indian action.
Exactly.
It forgot to think. It forgot that it's not the India of 1962. So it's the India of 2020. So it got banged on two fronts. First is the military front, where Indian forces got mobilized in no time. We occupied Kailash range. We occupied the different areas, and we dominated ourselves in such a manner that Chinese understood what we mean to say. The second action was on global perspective and on diplomatic front. On diplomatic front, the way India mobilized the entire world in its favor. So except few countries like Pakistan or maybe a few other minor countries, nobody was standing with China for their Galwaan adventure. Second thing is that when we think of Chinese economic policies, whether it is BRI, whether it is CPEC, we all know that it is a package of debt trap. We talk about Sri Lanka, we talk about other countries, wherever China has done its investment, it is actually falling this country into debt trap, and the countries, barring Pakistan, has started to understand it. So that is another factor which is bringing to the light. The third factor is now, which is clear in the world, that now the global powers, the world needs an alternative to China. It needs a regional power in Asia, and that regional power can be none other than India. But India has to act responsibly. When we talk about responsibly, so India has to think of regional interest than of a countrywide interest. We need to pull in, we need to look forward for the interest of Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, countries located in Indian Ocean. Not only them, but India has to look for the interests of Afghanistan also, because they are part of the same region. For this, India needs to adopt a policy of shared neighborhood, as rightly brought up by Dr. Acharya. I 100% agree with her that we need to follow a policy of shared neighborhood, and somehow there is a mindset of a big brother concept in our foreign policy. So we need to come out of that big brother concept and work on a shared neighborhood concept. So everything has to work on three fronts. One is a military front, then is a diplomatic front, and the third is a shared neighborhood front for Asia, which will include all the Asian countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, countries of Indian Ocean, and ASEAN. ASEAN is a major contributor which is falling to the traps of China. So ASEAN, Indian Ocean countries, and countries of Indian subcontinent. India has to think of a shared neighborhood. That's what all I have to say. And since we are falling short of time, I must hand over to Aditya. And it has been a really wonderful conference, really wonderful discussion. People have spoken well. Thanks for it. Over to Aditya.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the speakers, to the chair. I think you did really very well, sir, Professor Mattu, sir. Thanks for taking out time from your very busy schedule, Professor Acharya. Thank you so much. And yes, very warm thanks to our great audience, to all the ambassadors, esteemed members of GCTC. Thank you once again, and do tune to our further updates. We are coming up very soon with one more webinar. Just stay tuned. Thank you so much.